Shabbat Shalom, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you this Yom, this day, which is the 26th of June on the Gregorian calendar. Sorry, I had to look that up. And it is the 11th of the third month, or the 10th, depending on your reckoning, on our Creator's calendar. This Yom, we have a special treat. This is actually an excerpt or a small section from the Syriac version of the Recognitions of Clement. In the Latin and the Greek version, as we're about to read, these chapters were actually not translated. And you'll see why as we go. But to make a long story short, in it, Kepha is teaching his taught ones about the difference between our Abba, the Father, his Mashiach, and the set-apart Ruach that he's given to inhabit among men. It absolutely and unequivocally refutes the idea of a Trinity where you have three co-equal persons that are separate in one, which the common scriptures also plainly refute, both in the original covenant, where Elohim is one and there is no other apart from him. He is unique. And then in the renewed covenant, where our Mashiach, who is sent from his Abba or Father, said that there is no one greater than him, and that it was not to be esteemed to be equal to Elohim. It's mentioned by his taught ones. So there's a clear distinction between what's in Scripture and what's commonly purported. Anyone that's familiar with the anti-Mashiach for Dummies or the Antichrist for Dummies videos knows that it was a nicolaitan heresy, and it was the doctrine of the coming anti-Mashiach that would be believing in a Trinity. And it was with the Thessalonian Codex. It was codified in the laws of Roman canon during the time of Sixtus III, or 666, the one that was named that, around, I believe it was 342 AD. And they went through their council. They put together the Theodosius Codex, who was the emperor at the time, and that was establishing the Roman canon law, so that by 380, they are enforcing these tenets of the laws of Rome by the sword or the secular government's military might. And that was with the Edict of Thessalonia, where they demanded that anyone that was going to be a believer call themselves Catholic Christians. They believed in the three co-equal members of a Trinity. They partake of the Mass, December 25th worship, and so on and so forth. Before that time, you'd already had Constantine, who was one of these people, establish Sunday worship, and then it was around 50 years later that it was enforced. In 380, they made the Edict of Thessalonia, in which 7,000 men lost their life for the truth. And that's a parallel, but it's a contrast. Remember, everything flipped around after our Mashiach came. At the time of Eliyahu, he and the 450 Kohanim of Baal were determining who was Elohim. And in there, when he was petitioning our Maker, it was before their encounter, he was petitioning him, saying that of all the people, he alone was left that was serving him. And our Mashiach, speaking to him at the time, said, there's 7,000 that have not bent the knee to Baal, and they will be preserved. In that same fashion, but flipped around, he had 7,000 that stayed true to him, that were martyred, but they're preserved for eternity. So those that sought to lose their life in this, lose their nefesh in this existence, saved it for everlasting existence. But right here, I just want to read this part. This is from the Nazarene Acts of the Apostles, or the Recognitions of Clement, specifically Jackson Snyder's version, which I highly prefer. It takes away a lot of the inappropriate language, although it isn't perfect itself. As we see here, it's missing this section as well. Not because he intentionally removed it, but because it wasn't translated. As far as I know, he didn't have it available. But right here is the editor's note for book 3, right after chapter 1. It says the Smith translation has a footnote here concerning missing chapters 2 through 11, stating that they are wanting in the manuscript of best authority, and it seems to be indisputable that they form no part of the original work. For this reason, and because we have found them utterly untranslatable, we have omitted them. It says, in the light of the previous chapter's mention of truth, the question is, are they truly untranslatable, or are they comprehendings that the adversary has been allowed to withhold for the moment from those seeking Yahweh as truth? And right here, just so you can see, he's talking at the end of here. It says, then beginning from the Abba, or Father, and the Son, and the Ruach HaKodesh, he briefly and plainly expounded to us, so that all of us hearing him wondered that men have forsaken the truth and have turned themselves to vanity. So you see what the topic was about that's missing. And as we go through it, it will be very clear. This is a second note that he put in, talking about how he thought he found the missing sections in what he calls the Homilies. We're not going to compare the two, but you can feel free to look that up on your own, or if you have this translation, you can read them and see what's mentioned there. It does not line up with what we're going to be reading. But this part right here is the excerpt from the Syriac Clementine recognitions and homilies. All right, it's the missing chapters, and whoever translated this version did not mince words, put in everything that they had. Although from the Syriac, it has a more Semitic feel to it. It sounds more rustic. It's a little harder to grasp because we don't necessarily speak this way. But Abba willing, you'll be able to see very clearly as we go through. I'll point out what he's talking about. And there are some sections where he's making segues or digressions to talk about different things that they had already had a conversation of. That kind of muddies the waters about how it's for confusion. It makes it a little more confusing. I'm going to try to walk us through that so that doesn't happen. I'll be honest, I had to read through this myself a few times before I was actually able to get it. But once I did, it made a great deal of sense. It goes along with everything that's in Scripture, and now it's so easy to see the truth of how things actually laid out that you can go back into any part of the renewed covenant or the old covenant, and you can see who's speaking, what was going on, with a lot more clarity and context. Especially when you keep in mind, no man in the flesh has ever seen the Father, because he's invisible. He is not of substance in that capacity. So here we go. I would encourage everyone to study this carefully, to listen to it. And if you find anything that's contrary to what you know to be written, please share. And if you find something that goes along with what you know to be written that isn't mentioned, also share. And thank you for your time. So I'll just read this here. It says, this is an excerpt of the Syriac Clementine recognitions and homilies. This is the missing chapters from the Greek or Latin translation. The same chapters that were said to be utterly unintelligible by the author of that translation. In it we will see the Father, or Abba, his Ben, and the Ruach HaKodesh clearly explained and defined, absolutely refuting the pagan myths of old and now, showing that there is no Trinity, nor anything unworthy of the Father. I highly encourage everyone to study this carefully, and keep in mind it too is a translation and may not be perfect. I have yet to find one that is. The only major thing that sticks out to me is the calling of his Ruach a her. The context is not pagan in any fashion, and we have countless examples of his Chokmah, or wisdom, being called her and she in the original covenant. also in Syriac or Ecclesiasticus, in the Hokmah Shalomo, and the extra writings as well. Second Baruch, you see an aspect of a female in the Shamayim Yerushalayim, as well as in Fourth Ezra. This is another one. And then the Shepherd of Hermas, if you recall, you have that female aspect that is our Mashiach revealing things to Hermas before he was able to receive him as he is. So this is not a new pattern or phenomenon. It's throughout Scripture. I wasn't familiar with it as much when I wrote this part, but there's more evidence than that even. However, it's not to say that there's a mother, son, father Trinity. That's what's being absolutely refuted with what's being shared. All right, please let me know if there is anything else that seems contrary to what is written. I do not see it and believe this perfectly describes who they are in relation to one another. Aside from spelling corrections, I will strive to type it out exactly as it is written in my hard copy. And then please let me know if there's any typos. Shalom and ahava, or love, from my family to yours. And this would be Book 3, chapters 1 through 11. And after Kepha arose at the time of the rooster crowing, immediately, while still intending to awaken us, he saw that all of us were awake, for the lamp was still burning. He inquired about our well-being, saw that all of us were seated, and he began to speak. Think not that it is without difficulty for a man to speak about the truth in the presence of crowds mixed of every kind. For it is not permitted to discuss that which exists with everyone because of those who are cunning and wicked. But it is not right for one to speak falsely because of those who love the truth. What then should one do who speaks the truth before crowds? He should hide it, and accordingly convince those who are worthy. Just like our Mashiach gave the example, he always spoke in parables, and he didn't speak to the people without a parable, but to his taught ones, it was given to know the secrets of the reign. But one who speaks truth to those who do not want to be delivered wrongs the one who sent him, whose words are like pearls. He commands not to give them to those who assume the form of dogs and swine. For when they have taken them, with wisecracks and contrivances of contemptuous words, they interpret them according to their own rubbish, so that they can take pride in the boasting of their own idiocies. Wherefore, I was turning about in many matters and returning, which is a long way of saying he was beating around the bush, so that because they are not worthy, I could hide and conceal the El-breathed word over all authority. And after Kepha had said these things, Aquila said to him, You have spoken rightly, but for our sake tell us the matters pertaining to the truth. And Kepha said, Whatever you desire, ask it now. And Aquila said, Tell of the account concerning the principality, or principalities and powers, and that with which Simon has found fault, as if it were inappropriate for it to be said that the Ben of Elohim, or the son of Elohim, is the Mashiach, for it should not be reckoned to him to suffer things similar to plants and the rest of non-breathing things, and also of breathing beasts. And this is alluding to what was previously spoken in their discourses already, when Kepha was trying to speak about the Mashiach being the only brought forth of the Abba, or Father. Simon the magician had refuted that it would be base and unworthy of the invisible and omnipotent Elohim to make himself like a plant that begets after itself, or like an animal and has to reproduce in a carnal manner. So this is what he took offense to, although, as we'll read, there's nothing carnal about his begetting of our Mashiach. It's done outside of the flesh or carnality whatsoever, which is also covered. But here we go. Then Kepha, after seeing that all of us wanted to hear the entire account concerning these matters, committed them to us thus. The word principality is spoken over many diverse things, over both sensible and intelligible things. But because we should not, prior to experience of sensible things, consider intelligible ones, for we stand by, it is first seemly and appropriate for us to begin from the things that are sensible, as we have received from them whatever is manifestly true as a certainty. And that's reminiscent of what's in Yahuchanan chapter 3, verse 10 through 12, where our Mashiach had said, if you don't believe me concerning the earthly, how can you believe me concerning the Ruachni or the Shamayim stuff? Basically saying that we have to learn through what we can sense and see and touch and taste and feel, and move on to the intellectual and what can only be perceived in the mind after that. Thence, furthermore, we may come to the comprehension of the things that are known by comprehension. We will begin with the fact that the sun was appointed as principal to rule over the Yom, but the moon over things contrary to it. And the same things were appointed for them to rule by him. For from him did they also receive their existence from the beginning. He even prepared them for the Shamayim and the Eretz or earth before he created in the beginning. But with them he also prepared the beasts that are upon the earth and in the sea, and the birds, trees, and herbs, and thereafter mankind, who not only began to exist, but also to live or to be, according to the commandment of El that he has given to him. But thus it is impossible for there to be many principalities, for there is one principality and one without beginning. The things then that come after these two are accordingly in use spoken of as if even they are called principalities, but I have formerly mentioned even the cause for this step, which leads and ascends from sensible things to intelligible things, so that in this way you may securely and truly become familiar, and on account of the tradition you may securely obtain things intelligible. We say, therefore, that El, and this would be the Father or the Abba being spoken of. We say, therefore, that El is without beginning, while we studiously, without corruption, are gradually advanced and led to the one who neither is the cause of himself, nor has begotten himself, for he exists without beginning, or without an original. There's no point in time before his existence, is what it says. The self-existent one who did not come into being shall bring us near to know who he is. Although he did not become a being, those who then called the self-existent one who did not come into being the father of himself and the begetter of himself dared to reject him. So he's saying that because they thought poorly, because he is the one who is without beginning and did not come into being, because they thought he begat himself, they're rejecting him. And this is why it's imperative we're very careful about what we choose to believe. This is, and they became slaves to ambitions and inferior thoughts, for they reckoned and thought it was necessary for him to begat himself, for he existed before the form of youth. They set up the non-existent in place of the existent, and they spoke as if he had come into being by means of himself. For they withdrew into madness, and to plants with lichen, the self-existent one who did not come into being. If you're familiar, some plants can reproduce of themselves without any outside source. They don't need another plant to fertilize. A fig tree self-pollinating, for example. There's other plants that also do that. And to be asexual, as they call that, with a plant, that is something that they were trying to equate to that was error-filled, as you can see. I mention this and I'm going into detail because there are sincere believers, even this as we speak, that hold that our Abba begat himself to become his own Mashiach. And right here you can see that that's plainly spoken against. It says, they are rash with the things of the Greeks, but all of them are within impiety, and it clings to them furthermore without perceptibility. For they have not known him when they say that he exists or that he does not exist. For by the fact that he begat himself, he would exist, but by the fact of being begotten from himself, he would not exist. He would not therefore exist because of being begotten, nor would he exist because he begat. But while he exists, the profession of the fear of El does not permit us to speak twice about him. So that might sound a little confusing, but he's saying right here that he could not be, it's a contradiction. If he begat himself, then he would exist because he made himself, but then he couldn't because he could not have created himself before he existed. It's an oxymoron, what we call it, or it's a mental conundrum that's impossible. And what he says right here is, but while he is, the profession of the fear of him does not permit to speak twice about him. And he'll go further on to say that it's dangerous to think beyond just be appreciating that he is and did not come into being. All right. Right here, chapter 4. It says, but furthermore, even common reasonings accurately and securely drive away from us this blasphemy and grant us to speak that which is fitting of the self-existent one who did not come into being. What therefore should a man say when asked by those who impiously say beforehand, did he not exist before he was about to come or to become the father of himself? Is it therefore possible, by means of reason, for the one who has existence to be called the father of himself and the begetter of himself, before he could give himself existence? But he would not exist for the fact that he pre-exists, which indeed is a sign of reckoning, meaning he couldn't make himself exist if he already existed. That's not, he's already there, so there's no creating to be done. It is presumption, then, to say that the self-existent one who did not come into being came into being from himself. However, it occurs to those who thus speak as if by instruction to say this: it happens to those who are drunk to jump over their own shadows instead of pits. Wherefore, it is appropriate before everything to make an inquiry concerning immortal things, while expounding from the tradition of our Master, where he teaches the work of mortals, who are subordinated to those who are immortal, meaning that we listen and we have to serve those that are of the Ruach, either the one of light or the one of darkness. And it's of those two ways between Chaim and Mut, or life and death, as they say, or between the light and the darkness. In the vision of Amram, which also covers this, and he had a dream where he sees our Mashiach as Melchizedek, the Shar or the Prince of Light, and he also sees Satan, who is known as Malki Rasha, or the King of Evil, and also the Prince or Sar Choshesk of darkness, right? One or the other is ruling over every man. And if you want to know what camp you're in, it's best to see the book of Gad the Seer, chapter 14, where he goes into detail about what happens on the first of the 7th month when 3 books are opened by our Mashiach, and he reads first the righteous deeds of his people, then the unintentional sins, and then the malicious sins. The first is denounced as righteous and they'll live forever. The second is our Father says, put that away until a third of the month has passed to see what they'll do, whether or not they're repenting and remorseful on the Yom HaKippurim, or the Day of the Coverings, what we call the Day of Atonement. And then the malicious sinners, the ones who intentionally do evil and are spiteful against those who do good to them, they return Tob, or evil for Tob. They're the ones that are given over to Satan directly, and he can do with them as he pleases. Now, just so you know, if you are remorseful and repentant, you are still in the camp of your Creator, and he forgives those trespasses once every year. This is done perpetually. It's mentioned, like I said, chapter 14 of the book of Gad the Seer, and it's also spoken directly. I almost quoted it word for word there for a moment, but it was paraphrasing, in the book of Yobelim, where it mentions once each year he will forgive the transgressions or the sins of his people that repent. After the renewed covenant, if you remember, we've spoken about that before, it was supposed to be different on how we keep that feast, because once you're born again, you're not supposed to be sinning. And if you're not sinning, you don't have to afflict yourself for the sins that you haven't committed. They actually had new instructions that were given, but we don't have those anymore. And personally, I still have error in me, so I still fast at this time. This is, for he proclaims danger, speaking of our Mashiach. He proclaims danger and trial until death, with the hope and expectation of the baraka of the reign, wherein he said, do not fear those who kill the body, but are unable to kill the nephesh, or inner being, but fear him, or reverence him, who is able to destroy both body and nephesh in Gehenna. Matnyahu 10:28. Amen then, or so be it then, if the nephesh neither dies with the body, nor is cut off, nor suffers any of the things a body suffers, like the things that it experiences either internally or externally, small or large, healthy or sick, severed or conjoined. Although even in the generation of mankind, nothing helps the nephesh by experience, unless everywhere in motion, it remains in its unchanging being. Then, in diverse movement toward every affair, it directs the body. Meaning that the inner being of a man, which is inside the body, is immortal. It's not something that suffers what the body does. And when the body dies and is separated from it, you don't cease to be. There's other areas in Scripture, 4th Ezra, which we read, Hanok, and even a few places in the recognitions to talk about what happens after death. Not really wanting to get into that right now, but the idea that the inner being is immortal and does not die is all throughout the Scriptures, although it has been hidden. And it's something that you can take, you can get the wrong comprehension of what's in the renewed covenant and come away with the idea that you sleep when you die and you don't have any remembrance. But that denies the very parable of our Mashiach between Lazarus and the rich man, where it was after their death, and while Lazarus, or Eleazar, was being comforted, the rich man was afflicted and tormented. So there was no rest for either one of them with incoherence. Either way, there's a lot to that, and something we can go into more at another time if you prefer. But to continue here, he goes on to say, therefore, The body experiences in its existence and in its being, in order that it, the inner being, or the nephesh, what we call the soul, may be able by experience to make examination and learn. For after nourishment of those to be born, it is sufficient for the womb, because of enlargement, that the infant who pushes and is pushed, as if in struggle with the creating world or word, and has been strengthened, hastens to come out. This then determines its hastening to come out. Yet this same cause transmits the passions to descendants and to the fecundity of the very form. The fecundity is the having children, right? The ability of procreation. But when passion occurs, there is received either danger that was common or some part as much. He's relating that the experiences of the inner being in our body help us to grow and learn in the same way as a baby developing in the womb is struggling in the womb and pushing against and trying to grow and get strong so they can be born. That's what he's equating this with, and how our existence and the trials and things that we suffer are like the birth pains, if you will. But indeed, even everything that is subservient to the desire of women is prepared and prefigures naturally in all the stages of every man, as thus a child is otherwise and with a different behavior than one matured, and the man then otherwise. For a child has the power of partnership with them, but does not have within his power also the agitation of the nephesh or inner being. He then, who has matured, is prepared against impulsiveness, but still does not yet have use of the things he resolves. However, the man obtains by his will even a perfection of use. And this is just another way of saying that he's equating these things in another fashion. As a man is born and grows, he becomes more competent. When you're young, you might try to do things like your father does, and you can fail at it miserably, even though you're doing the best you can. You're just not skilled. But as you get older, you get the know-how, but you can still be a little clumsy with the operation of it. Generally, though, as a man, you have the experience and the know-withal to accomplish the things you seek to do and to do them right. And it is not then possible from these things alone to speak about the immortal nephesh and about the frail body, although even from them were commandments given to the safe or to the self as common, as our master said. It was said to the former ones, do not commit adultery. But I say that you should not even submit to lust from form and sight. So he's giving an example here. The adultery would be the physical or the sensible, but then the lust would be the intelligible. It's what you can control. One is carnal and of the body, and one is a commandment of the inner being. But there is a distinction, and that's what he's trying to point out. For if the body is naturally bound to the desire of partnership of women, being then necessarily subject to those from whom it has even received its existence, and that one may have in certain behaviors that which is prior to one's own body, how therefore can a man think that it was said to the body, do not commit adultery? But I say that you should not even submit to lust, but not to that which is free in his inner being from the passion of such things, and has to direct and guide the body in action, whether the better command instructs it. This is the same as saying there's nature's laws and the laws of nature's Elohim, as it's enumerated in the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence. you have the natural law, which is common amongst everything, the right to life, the right to defend yourself, the right to procreate. And then you have our Elohim's law, where he says, do not commit adultery, do not lust after another man's possessions. So while any animal can procreate, it's a man who's required not to do so without any distinction, because there's consequences for those actions. And that's why these commandments are not for the body. It's not for the carnal. It's for the intellectual part of a man, or your inner being, that he gives these things, the part that's rational and free in everyone and not subject to the passions of the body. All right, so to continue, it says, for thus, because we expect and hope for future things, we may avoid becoming angry. We may overcome rage. We may cause our mind to rise above. And as I say, not all of what we are is subservient and subject to the desire of women, but something of us is subservient by its nature, as we have shown that it is the body. And then something of us is the will, which is the agitation of the immortal nephesh, or inner being. Therefore, we have found that these things are thus a tov, or good step, towards the comprehension of intelligible things, so that a man can converse with the will of El. And now we may proceed without peril, while becoming familiar with the expectation of the immortal nephesh, or inner being. And furthermore, we shall not allow bodily passion to enter into the intelligible, immortal being, while we distribute the complete honor to each of the intelligible things, as much as the order permits of their existence or pre-existence. And he's saying, now that he's spoken of things that we can see, taste, touch, feel, and hear, the sensible things, now we're going to move on to the ones we can only know in the mind. And he's going to go in order of priority. So speaking of the unbegotten, Abba, and then our Mashiach, and then the set apart Ruach, in that order. He goes on to say, there is therefore first the self-existent one who did not come into being. For about him even the foretellers testified, quote, I am the first and I am the last, and apart from me there is no other Elohim. That's from Yeshayahu 44:6. Now, this was how it was originally worded in this version of the scriptures. And when I saw that, I realized it was not the same as what I'm familiar with, because that word will usually say besides. But if you look up what besides literally means, the definition means to be apart from. So it's just two ways of saying the same thing, although we have a different meaning of besides that can be equated. It's also literally on the side of. In this context, though, it never means on the side of, but it literally means apart from me. So when our Father, or when our Abba, says that there is no Elohim apart from him, that's absolutely true. In the first instance, because he is the only true Elohim, and only those that he bestows it on can truly be called Elohim. Like our Mashiach is El, the Word, who is sent from the Abba, or Father, and he was made Elohim over the people in the exact same fashion that our Mashiach showed and made Moshe Elohim to Pharaoh. Because as we'll see, he can only do what he sees done, and he can only say what he hears said. All right, so he had said, I am the first and the last, and apart from me there is no other Elohim. While apart from me shows that he is without beginning and the self-existent one who did not come into being. Right? Oh, I also wanted to point out how it was literally true that all Elohim come from him. We'll read in a minute as we go on, but basically, because he is the self-existent one who did not come into being, we all exist because he is. And that includes all of the idolatrous, false, mighty ones that were brought into existence. Everything that was made exists because he is. But that doesn't mean it was always his will, that it was never his will that evil or error is introduced into creation. That's something that is contrary to the truth. But to continue here, but Clement and the rest were gesturing to one another, for they wanted to hear what is the self-existent one who did not come into being. Then Kepha perceived and said, "It is not a little dangerous to speak and to hear about the one without beginning. But you, because of satisfaction and love of the thing said, shall fall into danger, for you are immoderately desirous, and you would even ensnare me to suffer this as it seems. For you think that I am able to discourse about the hidden one who is ineffable." And this doesn't mean that we can't speak of him, but he's not approachable. If you remember, Shaul says he dwells in inaccessible light, who no man has seen or is able to see. Not even the messengers can perceive his face, only our Mashiach. He says, "I advise you." It's in the common scriptures where Shaul mentions in one of his epistles that our Abba dwells in light inaccessible. And in the book of Hanok, when he is turned into a messenger and brought into the Shamayim, he's brought before the presence of the Father, and he sees the hosts of the Shamayim worshiping and fearing before him, but not able to gaze upon his face. It mentions in there that even his garments are 7 times brighter than the sun. So beyond our ability to comprehend. But Kepha goes on to say, "I advise you, my brethren and companions, not to inquire what he is, but only to love to hear that he exists. For even to speak about him with many things is neither right nor proper. There is therefore the self-existent one who did not come into being, and he is honored or esteemed without a common name, for he is without beginning. But the one who is without beginning and is the self-existent one who did not come into being is El, or Elohim. He did not come into being by means of generation. May he be praised as far as he alone is Tov, or good, but by himself is comprehended. For it is not possible for anything to have existed before him, and anything that thereafter came into being will perceive itself by the fact that he exists and is without beginning. This is just like saying the Shema. Shema Yisrael, Yahuwah Eloheinu, Yahuwah is one. And it's further reiterated and given even more detail in the first command in the Shepherd of Hermas, Book 2, the Commands of Hermas, where it says that the Father himself contains all things, but is not contained by anything. And it's also translated or worded differently, where it says where he comprehends all things and is himself comprehended by none. For the inquiry and investigation of generation, because of this, is the secret of his existing and is ineffable. So this is the thing that we don't talk about, because it's detrimental to our eternal well-being to consider these things poorly. We don't question where he came from. We just acknowledge that he is and did not come into being, and we be content with that, because we are created and finite, and we don't get to question our maker. Right? But I'll read this again. It says, for the inquiry and investigation of generation, because of this is the secret of his existing and is ineffable, as one must first consider the fact that there exists a position without inquiry, for there is no double to the fact that he exists, by which one can investigate that he exists, meaning there's no one his equal that can question him or judge whether or not what he's doing is right. Therefore, one who knows oneself also does not further inquire about oneself. But these things are also apart from what we have said is right and proper. For it is lovely for the self-existent one who did not come into being to alone be honored in silence and quiet. Therefore, you have received this being without beginning from us, according to our power, without danger. Therefore, the El who is without beginning begat the firstborn Ben or son before all created things. And that is the same as it says in Colossians there 1:15, that he is before all and in him all hold together. As is seemingly for El, while he was neither changed nor succeeded nor divided, nor did he emanate, nor was he even diminished in anything. For you recall how bodily passions are things that we have even avoided ascribing to the nephesh, as we have feared, lest its immortality, once they have been ascribed to it, would be nullified for it. Therefore, the existing El begat and did not suffer any division, for by the fact that he wills it, his power was not found deficient for his will, nor did he go beyond his power for the object of his will, but rather equally according to whatever he wills. Thus even does he begat by the fact that he exists and did not come into being with passivity. For if bodies that are subject to the necessity of density supply substance for shadows, increasingly much more to the self-existent power that did not come into being, should we grant that the only begotten follows after him. And I just want to focus on that for a quick moment here. That's an amazing thing to think about. He equates right here our Mashiach as being like the shadow that's produced from the body of a man. And our Abba is light, and he's the father of lights, and our Mashiach is like the light of the world. The picture here is, you can say, like the father is a man, and as he moves his hand, and you can see that shadow in perfect proportion, the exact image of the one who sent it, doing exactly what he is himself doing. And that's the picture that we can take from our Mashiach. While he is not our father, he is a unique and individual from him. He had his own passions, his own thoughts. He had the ability to choose what to do. He was given free will just like everyone. But because he freely chose to do the will of his father, all those things came upon him. He's literally at the right hand of the greatness on high, ruling over all things because of his disposition. And of all created things, he was the one who was chosen to represent the truth and to be the herald of the true Elohim. That's the great benefit of seeing this picture. When we see our Mashiach, we can know that he is the perfect example for us to follow and emulate in being free-willed and submitting to the will of the one who made us. But in that same fashion, he is also the one who made us, who pleased the Father to endow with him all authority. And that's something that we'll see as we go along. But he says, on account of this, then, in truth, he is appropriately called the begotten, because in his being, he is not the Father, But I remember that Shimon was complaining that we had said that the Ben of the Abba is the Mashiach. For he spoke, and he spoke in blasphemy against us, as namely, you equate men and plants with Elohim. Hasten yourselves from your entire nephesh to learn. And now he's going to explain. And then after all of us gestures to him lovingly, Kepha said, manifest is the way of disbelief, O Aquila and you remaining others. One indeed does not truly know, and until he receives what alone is told in his hearing, he is afraid to believe. But when he has been empowered by one who is able to drive the cause of disbelief out of him, he will be encouraged with the joy of this introduction, and without being asked, he will hide his disbelief of his questioning by love of desiring to learn. For there are many sicknesses of disbelief, but our discourse concerning this must come afterward, lest it lead us away in the presence of the expectation of finding belief, and draw me near to inquiry before belief. Therefore, everywhere El should first be honored by us, and so that inquiry concerning him may be made known to you. Therefore, as is seemly for El, he begat his only begotten and firstborn son before all creations. Indeed, he did not bring himself to action or begat himself, for he was not awaiting impassive and inviolate, if he were in himself active. For it is impious to think such things as these about the self-existent one who did not come into being. For in danger are all the impious, as if they rightly schemed and greatly blasphemed against the self-existent one, that he is a female male, or a male female, what they call a hermaphrodite, which ties back into the goat thing of Mindy's in scripture, which in modern terminology they call the Bahumet, not to be focusing on wrong names and titles, but to point out that the same theme, which is satanic, was carried on all the way back 2,000 years ago with Greek philosophy and the errant beliefs that they had. So to continue on, he says, but I recall that I have reminded you even of this, my brethren. This is the last chapter here. It says, by the fact, therefore, that he exists, El begat him, as was formerly said. Wherefore he was truly called only begotten, for it is by means of the self-existent one that he has his existence. And he was truly called the Son, or the Ben, which the Hebrew word there, bet noon, is also similar to where we get our words for building, like a construction. Bone, Binah is to build, right? Binah is comprehension. And all of these things are related to our Mashiach in a quite literal way. But it says, and he was truly called the Ben, or the Son, for he was begotten of the self-existent one who did not come into being. But gently and little by little we will mitigate the injurious impudence of those who dare to divide the self-existent one with the name of mere generation, and esteem the generation that is divided in contradiction of name with the being of the self-existent one. Meaning, he's trying to mitigate those that think our Mashiach was the Father that begat himself. All right, he says that's blasphemous and injurious. This is why I think this is very important for us to go over, because it's an honest mistake I believe that many are making based on what we can see in Scripture. The idea, though, is we have to learn how to properly comprehend what's written by those that were taught correctly. Just like Moshe gave the Ruach to the elders, and it was from the position of the hands, the giving of the Ruach and the instructing them in the truth, that they were able to help others that were in need. But when there was a matter too hard for them, they would go up the chain of command, as you will. And that very pattern continued even through the times of the Dead Sea Scrolls, where they would have their elders, their leaders over tens, fifties, hundreds, and thousands. And if you could not get your remedy by going to your elders in that capacity, you'd go to your chief, and then you would go to the Kohen or to whoever was officiating, and they would go to the books. They would study the scripture to find out the answer. But here we go. But it should not thus be said, if then he is called something that he is not, then he is not called what he is. For he, by the existence of his own being, for he is by the existence of his own being. But to be called generation dishonors him, because he's without beginning. For he would have been called by something that he is not. But especially as El is rational of himself, and of himself without beginning, how is this not impious? It is not even possible to say that while he is the self-existent one, and while he is rational, he does not also increasingly desire him to correspond with himself, rather than to fall into the rank of duality. For he appointed as honorable the offspring of the unbegotten. This is saying that if he was to split himself up and to be in two natures, because he's rational and consistent within himself, he would desire to become one again and to not be split into two. But this takes away also from the honor or the esteem that was given to our Mashiach when we think that he's no one separate from. I got kicked and then it brought me back, so let me fix my screen real quick. Sorry about that. All right, now we have the screen back, so thank you. It says, it is not even possible to say that while he is the self-existent one, and while he is rational, he does not also increasingly desire him to correspond with himself, rather than to fall into the rank of duality, for he appointed as honorable the offspring of the unbegotten. And I had mentioned already the first part, and the second part I was mentioning was that when we believe that our Abba begat himself, and there's really one and not the setup that he says and that he gave us in his word, we actually remove the honor or the esteem that was given to our Mashiach, because he was esteemed with the same esteem that our Father gave him from the beginning, but he's not the same. And if you recall what we had in the book of Gad the Seer, chapter 1, where Gad is receiving a vision, and in that vision you have the song of the Lamb. After the song, the Father and our Mashiach have a back and forth, but our Mashiach describes the Father as the one whom no one is like or equal to anywhere, and he is the Most High. And then in return, our Father is describing our Mashiach as the greatest created being, who there is no other creature on earth like him. But there's a distinction and difference between the two. This should help us make sense of things like what we had read already in the Shepherd of Hermas, about our Mashiach's body, and because he dwelled in it undefiled, it was given esteem and made resurrected and brought into the Shamayim. The Father's not dwelling in a body like that, but our Mashiach does. Our Father dwells in all the righteous, and he's not contained by anything. That's the point. Our Mashiach is a individual, is contained. He is finite, but it's so there. Abba willing, everyone can see these things now. We'll go ahead and continue. It says, "For no one exists, and also without then knowing oneself, says, 'Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool beneath your feet.' But he did not contend against himself, such that somewhat of him would remain the self-existent one, and somewhat of him would be subject to generation." My apologies. This is actually the 10th and last chapter. It started with chapter 2. He says, "However, to say such things about El is the greatest impiety, for it is manifest of all of them. Sorry, for it is manifest, and all of them, though capable of comprehending little, profess about the self-existent one who did not come into being, that he was of himself not passive on begetting. If then, after begetting, they never rose up contrary to disagree while divided in number, for he is not the father of himself, how would the self-existent one in his being not have increasingly desired to remain in agreement of existence? But in generation he was enumerated into duality. But this foolishness is the mother of ignorance concerning Elohim. However, her friend and sister is indocility, my apologies. However, the set-apart Ruach is the pledge and guardian of the things given to us by our Master. So now he's going back on. He was explaining and trying to go into detail about how our Father did not beget himself. The Mashiach is separate from our Father, although he only does and says what he sees from him, as we've already mentioned. Now he's going on to explain and show the difference of the Ruach in relation to the three. And just to make this very simple, before we even read this, if you think of like a hand in a glove with a hand in a glove kind of picture, what the Father does with our Mashiach is what the Mashiach does with the Ruach. It's literally a pattern after the same thing. And the more you see that, you take it all the way back to the beginning and you can see that pattern. So both in the actual way things were created, the events of creation, and how he does things. So now to explain the Ruach here, he says, however, the set-apart Ruach is the pledge and guardian of the things given to us by our Master, who not many yamim, or days, after his ascension we received, being of the only begotten, the seal and exact likeness of his power, just as even the only begotten and firstborn ben before everything is the image of the likeness that is exact without difference of the existing power, which she, the set-apart Ruach, is not, and the image alone without difference. But he, the Ben, provides the appearance of the self-existent one who did not come into being when he appears to both intelligible and sensible things, meaning that no one speaks to the Father. No one deals with him. No one's ever associated with him. He dwells in light inaccessible to every one, whether you're a Ruach, intelligible, or physical. Just like I had mentioned before, the messengers can't even see the face of the Father. It is only our Mashiach. So anytime there's any interactions or dealings between our Abba and his creation, It's done through his mediator. And this is why we can see when we look at chapter 18 and 19 in the book of Genesis, for example, the physical one that looked like a man that was standing before Abraham spoke to him and said, I am El Shaddai, walk before me, which means I am Elohim Almighty. It's a title for our Father. And then he says, walk before me and be perfect. Our Mashiach is not his own father, but he was speaking through him. He was the mediator for that message in the exact same way that Moshe spoke and our Mashiach spoke through him as well, which is something that you can read quite literally. It says that almost word for word in the Dead Sea Scrolls, that a gift of what Moshe was like was that the word of our Creator literally spoke through his mouth. And he was the one that was likened, Moshe was the one that was made like unto our Mashiach to show what he would be like when he came. And that's that picture again of a glove in a glove, in a hand in a glove, and a hand in a glove thing. So as the Father did with our Mashiach did with Moshe, because he only does what he sees and hears. That same pattern again, you can go all the way back to the beginning of creation and see how it's playing out like that. But we're almost finished. He says, for he is not the self-existent one who did not come into being, but rather his power is entirely of the self-existent one, through his existence and mightiness, and this completely shows accordingly what he is. However, to those who do not carefully inquire, the self-existent one who did not come into being has not made himself known. But for those whose inquiry is preceded by the fear of El, not only should they refuse to speak in this way, but they should also take care to meditate. As one, therefore, is the self-existent one who did not come into being, and one is the true offspring. The set-apart Ruach can neither be called Ben, son, nor firstborn, but she is numbered with the Father and the Ben as the seal of the primal glyph of the power of the two. Meaning, our Abba had a purpose and plan through which he made his word, which is our Mashiach, from his own bosom. And it's through his word that he does all these things. And it's from the word who speaks. And it's his voice is Ruach that effectually does these things. And that's why he says, the words that I speak to you are Ruach and Chaim, or they are spirit and life, as they say. For even the Ben is the power of the very Father, and his likeness is infused with his existence by equal will, as the offspring of his existence appropriately appears with him. Many things then, and even others concerning the Father, the Son, and the set-apart Ruach did he explain, and he convinced all of us, and without the inferiority of visual proof, he committed the truth to the sense of our hearing. Thus all of us, after having heard, were grieved concerning how much mankind had stumbled and turned away from truth. And this is a condition that we ourselves are in likewise, where there's so many divergent opinions in this very topic. And furthermore, it had since at least 380 AD been enforced by edict with the threat of violence. And that carried on for a very, very long time throughout what we call the Dark Ages, where it culminated in the Inquisitions, which is a horrible time we really don't need to get too far into right here. But Abba willing, this was beneficial, and you're able to gain a better comprehension of the things that are right here. So Thank you all for your time. You have a wonderful Shabbat. And if we have any questions or comments we record, we'll go ahead and do that. But otherwise, if not, we will see you next week. Shabbat Shalom.